Okay then, guys. So the main learning for this lesson is based on this article about Martha Turner's murder. So you will find your own copy of it in the folder, and you need to read that carefully twice. I'm going to read it to you in a second as well. Um, just going to go over the activities that you're going to do with that article first, though. You're going to be analysing evidence. So it's explained to you in slide 9 that the chart on the next slide has several quotes in the newspaper article, and what you're thinking about is what the writer feels, imagines, or thinks about the murdered lady, and how he shows that he feels this about the murdered lady. So we've got here the quotes that you're going to use, and we've got how does the writer feel, imagine, or think about the woman, and then how does the writer show us how he feels? Use single word analysis. So I can come back to that after reading the article and just explain a bit more about filling that in. Okay, so you go to your article. It's called IJ Week 4 Year 9 Martha Turner's Murder Abridged. Abridged means that the article has been shortened just for the purpose of the lesson. Okay, Martha Turner's murder. Jack the Ripper. So remember what you're thinking about is what the writer thinks of the woman that was killed. In August 19, not 1988, the year I was born, in August 1888, the East London Observer reported on the Whitechapel mystery. The identity of the woman who was found so cruelly murdered and outraged at 37 George Yard Buildings on the morning after Bank Holiday has at least been decided, and henceforth the murdered woman will be known as Martha Turner. It cannot, however, be said with any degree of certainty that that was her correct name. It was simply the name by which she was known among her equally unfortunate associates on the streets. Because, unhappily, one result of the inquiries made has been to connect the deceased with that class of women whom poverty and misfortune have driven to seeking a living upon the streets of London. If you are that class of women that has been driven to seeking a living upon the streets of London, I think you will already know what they're doing as a job. But just to confirm that for you, these women are working as prostitutes. The woman who identified the poor unfortunate was Connolly, otherwise known as Pearlie Poll, a tall, masculine-looking woman who had been hunted up by Inspector Reed of the Criminal Investigation Department. Beyond identifying the body, Poll gave another piece of information which seemed at the time likely to prove immediately useful. She stated that, on the night preceding the murder, she was in the company with the deceased in the Whitechapel Road when they were accosted by two soldiers who invited them to drink at a neighbouring public house. The invitation was accepted, and the women and the soldiers stood drinking there till late in the night, when something was said in the hearing of Connolly about the deceased accompanying one of them to George Yard. So the deceased is the woman that's been killed, the dead person. At the parade of soldiers which took place on the Tower on Monday, a man was identified as being present, but the soldier refused to give any account of himself. This information was sufficient to warrant taking Connolly to the Tower in order to endeavour to identify the soldiers with whom the women had been drinking, two of whom had been placed under temporary arrest on suspicion. Inspector Reed, accompanied by Pearlie Poll, proceeded to the Tower on Monday afternoon, and Pearlie Poll was asked, "Can you see either of the men you saw with the women now dead?" Poll, in no way embarrassed, placed her arms akimbo, glanced at the men with the air of an inspecting officer, and shook her head. This indication of a negative was not sufficient. "Can you identify anyone?" she was asked. Pearlie Poll explained, with a good deal of feminine emphasis, "He ain't here." There is, there is one fact noted by Inspector Reed which seems to prove that the murderer was a military man, and that is the wound on the breastbone of the woman. It will be recollected at the inquest. It will be recollected, sorry, at the inquest. When asked his opinion as to the instrument with which the wounds were inflicted, Dr. Keeling replied that they were undoubtedly committed with an ordinary pocket knife, all except the wound on the breastbone. There have been many visitors to George Yard Buildings since the murder, with the rather morbid purpose of seeing the place where the deceased was discovered. Here, there is still a large surface of the stone flags crimson stained. It is at the spot where the blood oozed from the poor creature's heart. From an interview with Connolly, it appeared that Martha Turner had lived apart from her husband for some years, and latterly had attempted to get her living by hawking. Okay, so when you finish reading that, Hawking, by the way, is like selling things in the market. So she obviously did a couple of different things trying to make money. So when you finish reading that, you come back to this grid, okay, and you can see that the first line has been filled in for you. So I'm just going to explain that to you. Okay, so cruelly murdered shows that the writer feels pity for the murdered woman. We can tell the writer feels pity by the use of the adverb cruelly, which emphasizes the barbaric nature of the crime. So here you say, actually, how does the writer feel? What emotions is the writer feeling towards the woman? And here you analyze the language to show how you know that in more detail. And you can write that straight onto the slides. And then that will support you writing up some PEA sentences a bit later, but I will model that in a separate video.